The first step in a full restoration is called tataki atoshi, chipping off. Using a tool called tataki, they knock off the old, damaged lacquer coating. Then they scrape the surface smooth with a plain tool called maigana. Wherever the base wood has cracked, it's carved out cleanly with a chisel. This marks the first stage of surface preparation. Next comes umeki, patching with wood. The carved-out areas are filled with pieces of wood shaped to fit perfectly. It's important that the patching wood be of the same type as the surrounding material. Once the shape is adjusted, lacquer finally makes its first appearance in the repair process. This step strengthens the entire base layer. It's called kiigatame, or base hardening. They mix lacquer and turpentine oil at a 1:1 ratio to make what's known as katani urushi, and stir it thoroughly before applying. They brush it on so the lacquer soaks deeply into the wood. Covering the whole surface evenly is essential. After the base coat hardens and dries, they polish the surface with waterproof sandpaper. This process is called karatogi, dry sanding. In lacquer work, every single stage ends with sanding, using whetstones or waterproof paper again and again. Kokuso, lacquer filler. This material is used to fill cracks and seams in the wooden base. So, how is this karosu made? Let's take a look. Naturally, the base ingredient is lacquer. First, they measure out the right amount of yellow lacquer, ki urushi. Then it's strained through gauze to remove dust or debris. Next, they prepare rice paste. They cook powdered glutinous rice, Urushi mai, in water to make a glue. Then mix it thoroughly into the lacquer. Something unusual appears. Karamushi, also known as reimi or China grass. It's a plant in the nettle family, once used as a textile fiber before cotton existed. After mixing in the rice paste, they add the karamushi fibers and stir again. Finally, they add a bit of wheat flour. Mix everything well, and the black filler lacquer, karosu urushi, is complete. They cover the surface of the mixture with plastic wrap. Since lacquer hardens when exposed to air, this keeps it from drying out. Before starting work on site, they need sawdust, called kijiko, into the karosu urushi to make the filler. Kijiko is the fine sawdust left from smoothing wood surfaces. Adding it increases viscosity, allowing the filler to seal gaps tightly. The prepared kokuso filling process is then applied with a spatula to fill the patched areas and joints. When the repair area is large, linen cloth is inserted to prevent cracking or splitting, and the filler is pressed in firmly. This process is called kokuso komi, filler embedding. Next comes maigana, the smoothing step using the same plane tool. During kokuso zoroe, or filler leveling, this maigana is used. According to the principles of restoration, only tools that were traditionally used are allowed. Once the black filler has completely dried, the surface is carefully shaved smooth. Hikikomi shitaitsuke, the subsurface coating. This step evens out the base by applying another undercoat, since the filler tends to shrink after drying. The undercoat mixture consists of 1 part raw lacquer, 1.5 parts Jinoko, clay powder, and half a part Tonoko, whetstone powder. Jinoko is clay powder, while Tonoko is a finer whetstone powder. Tonoko particles are smaller and give a smoother surface. These steps complete the base preparation stage. The Nikko Shrine Cultural Property Conservation Association. This is where the restoration craftsmen and supervising engineers belong. The association was founded in 1950, after the devastation of World War II and the massive earthquake that followed, to restore the damage inflicted on these cultural treasures. In addition to restoration work, the association also conducts research, trains future artisans, and handles disaster prevention projects for the shrines and temples. Every detail of the restoration work is carefully recorded and preserved. These records become essential references for future repairs. Since the original construction of Nikko's shrines, valuable documents, including official building records, have been preserved. Even today, the repair methods are based on those old records, ensuring the restoration follows traditional techniques. Detailed investigation is indispensable for proper restoration. At Yomeimon, researchers discovered wall paintings by Toyo Bokeh and decided to analyze their pigments.
浮いてるやつは剥落止めにする予定なんです。今回こういうやつとかこういう風に中に落ちてるやつ。
The team carefully collects those tiny paint fragments with tweezers and places them into small bags. Each sampling point is labeled and photographed for precise records. Such meticulous research helps determine how the restoration should proceed. The samples are then sent to the Conservation Science Center at the Tokyo National Research Institute for Cultural Properties, to be analyzed by Professor Kitano's team at his traditional technology lab. They use mass spectrometry for organic analysis and X-ray analyzers for inorganic elements, combining science and art to study cultural properties. The results from these analyses, together with on-site surveys, determine the detailed restoration plan. As restoration progressed, new discoveries were made. The team found that the pigments and lacquer techniques used in Nikko had changed over the centuries. For example, the black lacquer used in the Edo period was quite different from today's materials. During this restoration, they discovered untouched rafter ends, coated with the original Shin-Nori lacquer at Toshoga Shrine. Modern black lacquer produces a rich, glossy black, but in the Edo period, achieving that deep shine was much harder, so it was reserved for the most important sections. In many other areas, they used oil-based lacquers with a duller finish, or matte Shin-Nori coatings. The shades of red also changed over time. Inside the Shinkyo Shrine at Toshoga, Columns and beams were once coated with a red lacquer called tsuchidane, which is no longer used today. Long ago, there were two main types of red pigment, tan and tsuchitan. Tan was made from a rare mineral called cinnabar, but because it was so expensive, artisans began using tsuchitan, a cheaper version made from hematite. There's a historical document from the Tsugaru clan in Aomori called Onyakoku. It contains a fascinating record. As an offering for the great Buddha hall at Nikko Toshoga, we contributed 600 can of tsuchitan red pigment. In the northwest of Aomori, in a small village called Akanasawa, the red earth used for tsuchitan was once mined. Along the roadside, there's still a small sign that reads Akanasawa Red Rocks. Behind it, on the mountain slope, lies the entrance to an old, abandoned mine, now completely forgotten. Let's try recreating the color of that ancient tsuchitan red. Mix 1 part clear lacquer, Suki Urushi, with 0.25 parts turpentine. Then add 0.25 parts of tsuchitan red pigment and knead thoroughly. The tool used here is called gokutsubushi, a wooden pestle shaped like a cut-down sword, used to grind the pigment into the lacquer. The well-mixed tsuchitan lacquer is then filtered through washi paper. Filtering is essential for every lacquer, whether base coat or top coat. The mixture is spread evenly onto a sample board using a spatula and a lacquer brush. These sample boards are crucial, as they serve as reference for the actual color on cultural assets. And so, the ancient tsuchitan red of the Jenna era is brought back to life.
元来の時はこういう土地乗りだった建物が、元禄の頃に重要なところは朱色に変わりまして、それなりに重要なところがこのベンガラ色に変わりました。それが現在に伝わっている塗りです。
Fukiya town in Okayama Prefecture, once known as the town of Bengra. It produced most of Japan's natural iron oxide red pigment. Even today, the town's streets are colored in Bengra red, but with modern industrial production. The old natural pigment mines have all but disappeared. Yet one shop still sells traditional Bengra, Nishi Town. Their Bengra is made from locally mined Jeyu Tetsuko, iron ore, known as Roha Bengra. They roast the iron ore to make iron sulfate and extract ferric oxide, the pigment known as Roha Bengra. The term Bengra refers to all red pigments made from iron oxide. Though Japan began importing Bengra in large quantities during the Edo period, domestic production thrived here in Fukiya. Among the many types, Roha Bengra has the most vivid color. That's why the red lacquer used in Nikko restoration is made with Roha Bengra. The decorative styles changed in other ways over time too. The 5-part coating on the Toshoga buildings, for instance, was originally left as plain unfinished wood. Later, people began coating it with tetsuo. By the late Edo period, that shifted again to the 5-part black lacquer style we see today. At Taiyuin, the Bengra red lacquer we see now was once a clear lacquer coating, Suki Urushi, which then changed to Tamanuri, a darker transparent finish, and finally to the Bengra red we know. These shifts mark distinct eras in lacquer history. At first, prestigious buildings like Toshoga's main hall had Hiwada Buki roofs. Later, they were replaced by copper sheet roofs and finished with black lacquer made from Suki Urushi mixed with soot. In contrast, Renoji's Hokkaido Hall used black oil lacquer, combining raw lacquer with soot and lampblack instead. Back at the Yameimon worksite, craftsmen have begun applying the undercoat to the adjusted wooden surfaces. Before that, they attach linen cloth as a base layer for reinforcement. To make sure the linen adheres firmly, they first brush on a thin preliminary layer. This step is called nuno shitaji, cloth undercoating. The same mixture used earlier, jinoko and lacquer, is applied here. Once that's done, the entire surface is dry sanded with a mixed abrasive. This dry sanding smooths the surface and ensures the next layers will bond securely. Lacquer coating involves endless cycles of coating and sanding, over and over again. Now it's time to attach the linen cloth. As an adhesive, they use mugi urushi, barley lacquer. Mugi urushi is made by mixing 1 part lacquer with about 0.15 parts rice paste and roughly 0.33 parts wheat flour. The proportions must be carefully adjusted depending on the thickness and stiffness of the cloth. Once applied, the linen protects the coating surface even if the wood joints beneath shrink or shift slightly. It plays a vital role among all the undercoats. The amount of mugi urushi applied must be just right, enough to soak into the cloth but still leave a slight layer on the surface. This adjustment requires great skill. After the cloth is pressed on, the excess is trimmed away cleanly, a step called nuno soroe, cloth trimming. This repair is a han naoshi, a full restoration, which means the entire surface receives new cloth reinforcement. Smaller repairs that only add cloth to deteriorated sections are called medium restorations. There's also core touch-up, which omits the cloth, and Uenori Naoshi, topcoat repair, which only renews the final lacquer layer. Once the mugi urushi dries, they polish it again with a mixed abrasive, so the next layer of lacquer will adhere well. Depending on the stage of work, 2 types of abrasive stones and 4 grades of waterproof sandpaper are used. The wet stones are for flattening large surfaces evenly. Next comes masuri, sealing the cloth weave. The tiny texture of the linen is filled in with jinoko undercoat. The tool used for applying this undercoat. What is it made of? It's a spatula carved from Japanese cypress. Lacquer craftsmen usually make all their own spatulas by hand. Depending on the type of undercoat or the part being worked on, they make different shapes and sizes and use each where it's most effective. Let's take a look at how one of these spatulas is made. The only tool used is a small carving knife. This short-bladed knife, called nushiwabocho, is sharpened on both the edge and the tip. It's a special kind of blade, used only by lacquer craftsmen. Press the spine of the knife against the knee, and shave using the strength of the entire body. Depending on the part being cut, use whichever edge of the blade feels easier to handle. They say that the most important thing in making a spatula is the flexibility of its tip. by checking the bending of the tip repeatedly. Each artisan makes a spatula that best suits their own use. Yagashi Cutlery Workshop. One of the few blacksmiths still making these special nushuabocho knives. Clay is applied to the steel that forms the base of the blade, and it is placed onto the well-heated base metal. The steel, high in carbon content, becomes the cutting edge of the blade. Once again, it is heated in the furnace. At this time, the temperature inside reaches about 1200 degrees Celsius. By hammering, the steel and base metal are forged and fused into one. Combining hard but brittle steel with soft and resilient base metal produces a strong and sharply cutting blade. This is the traditional technique of Japanese uchi hamono forged blades. The Yagashi Cutlery Workshop has long crafted tools for artisans. It is a blacksmith that carries on the Edo uchi hamono tradition. Farmers in Miyadai Ward, carpenters, and chefs using Japanese knives. They're all commissioned tools that value sharpness. Once again, the well-heated nushi knife is plunged into straw ash to cool. To cut it to the ordered size, precise measurements are taken. The grinder is used to adjust thickness and width, shaping the blade. The craftsman inscribes his name on the finished work. A mark of pride and purpose in life. Hardening the blade requires delicate temperature control. So the surroundings are darkened to better judge the heat. There is no room for error. Rapid cooling hardens only the steel, determining the sharpness of the edge. The hardened nushi knife is then finished with a tool called sen, used with both hands to smooth the surface. Thus, the nushi knife used exclusively by lacquer craftsmen is completed. In the restoration of Yomei-mon, after the Mayuri process, the Jinoshita foundation is applied again to stabilize the base. And the next process, fine foundation coating, begins. The Kiriko Shitai is a mixture of 1 part lacquer, 1 part Jinoko, and 1 part Tonoko, with finer particles than the Jinoshita Shitaji, by layering increasingly fine coatings. A strong and beautiful foundation is created. After applying the Kiriko Shitai, polishing begins, this time using water, a process called mizutogi. Compared with dry polishing, wet polishing flattens the surface faster and more effectively. After wet polishing, Kiriko Katame is performed, applying a fixing lacquer made by mixing equal parts of lacquer and turpentine oil. After wet polishing, it's necessary to reinforce the lacquer with this fixative. Then the surface is again polished with waterproof sandpaper. This time, dry polishing. Whether to use dry or wet polishing depends on the hardness of the lacquer and the next step. The restoration of carvings removed from Yomei-mon is carried out not on site, but in workshops. Damaged areas are reinforced with linen or Japanese paper, instead of being recarved. Preserving as much of the original carving as possible is paramount. While coloring the carvings is the work of painters, repairing the foundation is the lacquer craftsman's responsibility. In many cases, the paint alone is washed away with water, not scraped off, in order to preserve the original carved form. They are told to work so carefully that even chisel marks remain. After cautious sanding and preparing the base, they apply the gold leaf layer, the base for pigments, and hand it over to the colorist. At the Yomeiman site, the final stage of foundation preparation has begun. Applying the Shabi Shitaji rust foundation. Let's look at how the Shabi Shitaji is made. It is a mixture of 1 part lacquer, 0.5 parts Jinoko, and 1.5 parts Tonoko, finer than the Kiroko Shitaji. First, Jinoko is added to lacquer and thoroughly stirred many times. When Jinoko blends well, Tonoko soaked in water is added next. The finer the components of Shabi Shitaji, the smoother the coating becomes. But it also deteriorates faster. To prevent that, a small amount of Jinoko is added. The finished Shabi Shitaji is then applied to all areas under repair. By adjusting its composition, a fine, even texture is achieved. All the steps up to this Shabi Shitaji are called foundation layer formation. Next comes the finishing layers. After applying the Shabi Shitaji, wet sanding, and fixing with hardening lacquer, dry polishing with waterproof paper completes the base. Though often overlooked, the foundation is crucial. Without it, coatings don't last long. In lacquer work, this groundwork is of utmost importance. Lacquer has been used in Japan since the Jomon period. These lacquered artifacts were excavated from the Shimo Wakame site in Higeshimura-yama, Tokyo. Applying lacquer to pottery or wooden objects strengthened them and added beauty. Until modern times, lacquer was Japan's most common coating material, used for tableware and furniture. These finds date to around 2000 BCE. But lacquer from more than 10,000 years ago has been discovered at Mikata Gokko in Tottori Prefecture. At the Shimo Wakame site, tools suggesting Jomon period lacquer application have also been unearthed. Pottery fragments likely used to hold lacquer. Stones thought to have been used for grinding pigments into fine powder to make red color. And even lacquer trees bearing tapping scars. It's clear they used the same harvesting method as today. Joboji Town, Iwate Prefecture, the only remaining village in Japan where lacquer tapping still continues. The bark is peeled off the spot to be tapped. Until modern times, lacquer trees were widely cultivated across Japan. But today, only about 20 people, mainly in Joboji, continue to protect domestic lacquer. On the peeled section, parallel cuts are made with a tapping knife alongside older scars. From those cuts, sap slowly seeps out. The sap is scraped with a spatula and dropped into a lacquer pot. This work continues from tree to tree throughout the forest. Though lacquer grows across East Asia, much of what's used is Chinese. Yet Japanese lacquer is said to best suit Japan's climate. Even in Nikko, During a certain period in the Showa era, when domestic lacquer was hard to obtain, Chinese lacquer was used. But in the Heisei era major restoration, only Japanese lacquer was employed. Using the same materials as before restoration is the basic policy of repair. Each day, sap is tapped from 100 trees, moving through 4 groups of trees over 4 days, returning to the first group on the 5th day. How much was collected today? Checking the yield is one of the tapper's pleasures. The raw sap itself is called aramik urushi, crude lacquer. On average, a lacquer tapper harvests about 80 kilograms of aramik urushi per season. Shimoji Ward, Kyoto City. Near the center of Kyoto is the Tsutsumi Asakichi Urushi store, where lacquer is refined and sold. Crude lacquer harvested in Joboji, Iwate, has just arrived here. In the Tsutsumi factory, the refining process begins. First, impurities are removed from the crude lacquer. The crude lacquer is poured into a large container and set in a stirrer. Cotton is added, quite a lot, to absorb impurities. When passed through a centrifugal separator, the lacquer separates from the cotton. Purified lacquer seeps from the outlet. This is Urushi, raw yellow lacquer. Next, the lacquer is refined by breaking down particles and evaporating moisture. This is a rare scene from the past. Until around 1965, lacquer refining was done outdoors. Now rushi, stirring, to refine particle size, and kurome, sun drying, to remove moisture were done simultaneously. Under the blazing summer sun, yellow lacquer was poured into a large basin and stirred like rowing a boat with a shell. This stirring scene was once a summer tradition in lacquerware producing regions. Now iron powder comes into play, because black lacquer is being made. Colored lacquer is made by mixing pigments into refined lacquer. But black lacquer is produced through a chemical reaction with iron powder, not pigments. First, iron powder is mixed into yellow lacquer, stirred well, then left to rest for 2 or 3 days. During this time, the chemical reaction begins, and a faint black hue appears. The darkening lacquer is poured into a large basin, and stirred thoroughly. This is the now rushi step. As stirring progresses, heat is added to the basin. With an electric heater to raise the temperature, this is kurame, done simultaneously. As the water evaporates, the lacquer deepens in blackness. When it reaches a certain depth, a bit is brushed on glass to check the color. Stirring continues while adjusting the heat. Finally, the heavy, deep black is complete. The heater is removed, and the finished black lacquer is taken out. if the same process is done without iron powder. The result is Suki Urushi, the clear lacquer used for colored lacquers. The finished black lacquer is true jet black. The black within black. Its glossy depth cannot be achieved, even with modern materials. It remains a rare and highly valued color. The completed black and clear lacquers are packed into small wooden tubs for shipment. As the summer heat finally subsides, the finishing lacquer coating begins at Yameimon. In coating, dust is strictly forbidden. After the sabi katame, final hardening, the surface is carefully wiped with a tack cloth. This is called nogabarai. The first middle coat. The middle layer lacquer is spread evenly with a spatula. From this middle coat, black lacquer is used for the first time. Up to the foundation, lacquer was mixed with powders like Jinoko and Tonoko, but from here on, only pure lacquer is used. The lacquer is leveled and applied like a layer of makeup. Next comes Tsukuro Isabi, filling small depressions with shabi compound. No matter how carefully the base is prepared, small hollows remain after the first coating. These are filled to make the surface smooth. After this Tsukuro Isabi, the surface is moistened again and polished with waterproof paper. In the past, a special ink called togosumi was used for sanding. But since it's now rarely made, waterproof paper is used instead. Then additional lacquer is applied only on the Tsukuro Isabi spots, a process called Tsukuro Isabi katame. This ensures that during the second middle coat, the gloss matches perfectly between the patched and surrounding areas. After such meticulous corrections, the second middle coat finally begins. As before, black lacquer is spread evenly with a spatula, adjusting the thickness uniformly. Then it is brushed with a lacquer brush. The Urushi brush is used from the coating stage onward. The lacquer brush, made solely for applying lacquer. Its bristles are made from human hair, thoroughly washed and repeatedly combed. To bind the hair, nori-urushi adhesive is made. Mixing rice flour and glutinous rice powder with lacquer. Today, only 2 lacquer brush makers remain in Japan. The finished nori-urushi is carefully worked into each strand of bundled hair. Coarse combs are replaced with finer ones, ensuring the hairs are perfectly aligned and evenly fixed. This requires skill. These are the tools for brush making. A young apprentice has joined the Furoshiba family to learn brush making. Perhaps another Furoshiba craftsman will be born. training successors, is an essential task in preserving cultural heritage. After drying, the opposite end of the hair is bound in the same way. Before the glue lacquer hardens, each strand of hair is carefully mixed together. After drying, it is trimmed to match the size of the brush. In the past, hair from women divers, ama, was said to be the best for brush making, but such hair is now almost impossible to obtain, and they rely on imports from China. Several of the cut bundles are layered together, and the outer side is bound with thin boards of cypress bark, glued with lacquer adhesive. A good brush cannot be made unless the adhesion is perfect, so the bark plates are tightly wrapped with hemp rope. Then wedges are driven between the hemp rope and the bark plates. If the wedges are struck too hard, the bark splits. If too soft, it won't adhere tightly. This step, too, requires experience. After drying for about a week, the bark plates are shaved and finished with a plane. Finally, the tip of the brush is sharpened and shaped with the blade of a plane. They say the most difficult part is rounding and curving the tip. This process marks the completion of the lacquer brush craftsman's work. Even tools for lacquer work like these carry on long traditions. Using tools that follow these inherited forms is a fundamental principle of restoration work. At last, the final stage of the finishing layer, the top coating, begins. Before applying the top coat over the wet polished surface, it is carefully wiped again with alcohol to remove even the slightest traces of oil from the hands or any dirt. The top coating with black lacquer begins. The lacquer used is the finest, most thoroughly refined, glossy lacquer intended for top coating. It is resistant to changes in temperature and humidity, and highly durable against ultraviolet rays. First, the lacquer is scooped up with a spatula and spread across the entire surface to be coated. This step is called distributing the lacquer. There is a strict order that must always be followed when applying lacquer. First, spread the lacquer with a spatula, then remove unevenness. Smoothing out unevenness means brushing perpendicular to the wood grain. This is repeated several times to prevent the lacquer from flowing before it dries. Then, the lacquer is spread along the grain using the spatula. This step is called leveling. Next, the lacquer brush, Urushi, is used to cut any unevenness left by the spatula. As the finish nears completion, the work must become even more precise and delicate. The ideal thickness of the top lacquer layer is said to be one strand of hair, about 0.07 millimeters. Finally, the lacquer brush is used again to smooth the surface. The skilled hands of the craftsman display their mastery. With this sequence, the top black lacquer coat, known as kurohana noshi, is completed. The basic principle of restoration is to reproduce the original color that existed before the repair. Now, an interesting step begins. Water is sprinkled over the entire drying chamber to moisten it. In the case of paints and coatings like enamel, drying usually means evaporating moisture. But lacquer absorbs oxygen from the moisture in the air to cure and harden. Therefore, the freshly lacquered pieces are covered with the moistened chamber, so the lacquer can absorb oxygen and dry properly. Through this process, the top coat dries, thus completing all the steps of Kurohana Noshi restoration. At the Nikko shrines, lacquer is not only black, many colored lacquers are also used. Let's look at one of them, the making of greenish transparent lacquer, seishitsu. The raw material for blue is chromium oxide. Of course, chromium oxide didn't exist in the Edo period. Back then, sekio, yellow mineral pigment, dyed with indigo was likely used as the component of seishitsu. Today, seishitsu is made by mixing chromium oxide and transparent lacquer, Urushi, in equal parts. On a flat plate, powdered chromium oxide and Urushi are combined and thoroughly mixed. Then, the chromium oxide powder is finely ground with a mortar and pestle. During the large restoration in the Showa period, it was discovered that what used to be six-color painting had shifted to seishitsu blue. In that restoration, black lacquer was used for the middle coat of seishitsu. But since the top coat deteriorated and revealed the black layer underneath, the current method uses seishitsu, even for the middle coat. Next, let's look at how Urushi, vermilion lacquer, is made. In the past, the red pigment came from the natural mineral shinsha, cinnabar, a compound of mercury and sulfur. Nowadays, Urushi is artificially produced by heating and calcining a mixture of mercury and sulfur. 1 part Urushi is mixed with 1.5 parts Shu pigment, and the two are thoroughly blended while the pigment is finely ground. Because Urushi is so transparent, a high amount of pigment is required to achieve sufficient color density. For the middle coat of Urushi, a stronger, more opaque red pigment, bengra, iron oxide red, is used. Since the heavy pigment makes the lacquer thicker and harder to apply, it requires great skill. But it is an important color for coating significant cultural structures. Now, let's observe bengra urushi application at the Yameman restoration site. For the middle coat, bengra urushi is made by mixing 1 part suki urushi with 0.2 parts loha bengra, refined red iron oxide. The vivid red of the bengra shines beautifully over the rust-colored base. Loha bengra is more difficult to apply than industrial bengra, but faithfully restoring the original color is the basic principle of restoration. Before applying the top coat, the surface of the middle coated bengra urushi is wiped clean with alcohol. For the top coat, bengra urushi is prepared by mixing 1 part suki urushi with 0.3 parts bengra. Since bengra has high opacity, less pigment is needed. The application procedure is the same as with black lacquer. Spread with a spatula. Smooth perpendicular to the grain, then level along the grain. The process is identical to that for black lacquer. Then, using a lacquer brush, the surface is evened again and smoothed out. This world of lacquer, so different from black lacquer, has its own distinctive atmosphere. Black, vermilion, bengra, greenish. Each color has its own character, and skilled hands faithfully carry out each step, creating a vivid world of color. Kanazawa City, Ishikawa Prefecture. This city promoted the development of Japanese crafts under the Maeda clan during the Edo period. That spirit lives on today, producing many traditional crafts. One of them is gold leaf production. Today 99% of Japan's gold leaf is made in Kanazawa. Let's see how gold leaf is made. Depending on the gold content, there are various types of gold leaf. At Nikko, they use Sangashoku, containing 95.79% gold. Although higher purity gold exists, they chose the alloy believed to match that used at the time of the shrine's construction. Pure gold is mixed with small amounts of silver and copper, placed in a crucible, and melted at 1300 degrees Celsius. The molten alloy is then poured into molds. The alloy is then rolled thin using a rolling machine. Gold has high malleability and ductility. 1 gram can be stretched to cover more than 1 square meter. Because such a small amount can beautifully cover a wide surface, gold has long been prized for decoration. The alloy is rolled repeatedly, gradually adjusting the thickness. Using the roller, the thickness is reduced to 0.03 millimeters. The thin sheets are cut into 6 centimeter squares and placed between sheets of parchment paper. This process is called hikiire. The bundle is then hammered in a thin beating machine to stretch the gold even thinner. This 4-stage beating process thins the gold leaf to about 0.003 millimeters. Gold leaf making is a division of labor craft. Workers up to this stage are called sumiya, and those who complete the finishing process are called hakuwa, foil maker. The thin sheets, now about 20 centimeters square, are called yuwazumi. These are handed from sumiya to hakuwa. The Ujio hammer the yuwazumi to a thickness of about 1/10,000th to 1/30,000 millimeters. The sheets are cut into 10 to 12 pieces, each placed between Japanese paper. Then hammered, moved to new paper, and hammered again repeatedly. The hammering spreads the gold evenly. And since hammering generates heat, they must repeatedly cool and re-hammer. Most gold leaf today is made mechanically with tachikiri using glassine paper. But the gold leaf used in Nikko is made by the traditional enchitsu, hand-beaten method. Though labor-intensive, enzuke gold leaf has a softer, more beautiful luster. For the final enzuke stage, special gold beating paper is used. Japanese paper from Nagio in Hyogo Prefecture is treated with persimmon tannin and soot. Each sheet must be fully saturated with the mixture. After resting overnight to let it soak in, the paper is carefully wrung so it won't tear. The still damp sheets are stacked 6 at a time, placed in mats, and dried. Gold leaf artisans who preserve this tradition take pride in their painstaking work.
これが縁付けの魂ですわ。
ああ、なるほどね。これによっていい箔が打てるか打てないか、もちろん紙もありますけど。
The half-dried sheets are lightly beaten to heat and fully dry them. In enchitsu, paper making accounts for over 60% of the work. It's that labor-intensive. After beating, the stacked papers are separated one by blowing air between them. As a byproduct, This paper becomes high-quality blotting paper, popular among women. Using this gold-beating paper, the finishing gold leaf is hammered.
これが日光さんに使ってもらっている三黄色です。
Each finished sheet is cut with a bamboo spatula to the required size. Inserted between sheets of Japanese paper for protection, and completed. This handmade Japanese paper differs from the beating paper. It prevents sticking and absorbs minimal moisture. These gold leaves are delivered to the restoration site at Nikko. After such meticulous work, the finished gold finally reaches the hands of the lacquer craftsman. A thin Bengra Urushi undercoat is applied to the karahafu gable. The gold leaf is pressed onto this red base to enhance its brilliance. Before applying gold, Suri Urushi, a thin wiping lacquer, is applied. This step uses Rosen Urushi, a highly adhesive lacquer. The surface is wiped clean with bleached cotton cloth. The gold leaf, made with care by Kanazawa artisans, is placed still sandwiched in its paper and gently pressed on. Then, using a soft brush, it is gently pressed from above to ensure adhesion. Most lacquered surfaces at Nikko are outdoors. If Rosen Urushi is wiped too much, the gold looks bright but deteriorates quickly. Therefore, the craftspeople leave just enough residue at the limit before deterioration occurs. Restoration work must follow traditional techniques, but also be designed to last as long as possible. Even small scraps of gold leaf are reused. Excess gold around the edges is carefully scraped away with bamboo spatulas or cloth. This process is repeated to finish the entire surface. The gold leaf applied to Nikko's most prestigious buildings resists aging and preserves their splendor. Another technique using gold is maki-e, sprinkled picture decoration. Usually maki-e is done by specialist artisans, but during the Heisei restoration, Nikko's own lacquer craftsmen handled the repairs for the first time. This is one of the most demanding and durable techniques in lacquer work. The vermilion lacquer adorning the main hall of Futara-san Shrine. Lacquers with red and blue pigments give these buildings their rich colors. The black lacquer and gold leaf of Rennoji Temple's Taiyuin shine in harmony. The jet black surface quietly reflects light, while the gold leaf radiates an elegant brilliance. The worship hall and main sanctuary of Toshoga Shrine, too, are finished in black lacquer and gold leaf. Like colored fittings, lacquer plays a vital decorative role in these structures. Toshogu Yamaimon, Rennoi Sanbutsudo Futara-san Shrine. Through the Great Heisei Restoration, the repair of these major cultural properties continues. Alongside lacquer restoration, Metal fittings and wooden structural repairs are also carried out. The tradition of preservation has continued since the Edo period. Modern restoration experts integrate contemporary methods, while continually researching and refining ways to reproduce the original form as faithfully as possible. Thanks to their ongoing efforts, Nikko's magnificent shrines will surely pass their splendor onto future generations.